what are we doing in the black community? The number one consumer of a Mercedes-Benz
is us.
Us. The number one consumer of a Gucci and a Louis Vuitton, us. And they don't even advertise. Why is it that in the black community, we are always the number one consumer, but we're not the number one creators?
So you just said it, the fact that there's consumers and creators. For so long, we assume success based on consumption.
Welcome to Closing the Gap, the truth about black wealth. Of course, I'm your host, Mr. Wilbert Hamilton, along with my co-host, Brother Eddie Richardson. And here again on the V949 WATV. Of course, you can find us every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Ready to jump into another wonderful episode. Continue to bring you a lot of wonderful information the way we've been doing in the past. Definitely blessed and highly favored to be here. I'm always blessed to share in this time and, you know, with good brothers that can share and uplift and pour into you. And we, you know, pray and plan that we're doing the same for you. You know, that's always a goal and objective to give more than you receive. We're all blessed to be a blessing. So without further ado, we want to jump right into the topic of the day. Of course, we've all come out of the election and talked about, you know, the next steps and what can we do. And even on the last radio show I did with Chris, of course, you know, catch us first Monday in every month on the Think Tank Mondays. We talked about what steps people can take in going into the new year. What's next? You know, now that Trump's in office, we actually talked about it on the last podcast. And, you know, really what it boils down to, and, you know, our goal and focus is, you know, my plan and purpose in life is to teach my community how to create generational wealth. And, of course, here at Closing the Gap, we want to, you know, close that wealth gap. And what can we do? And one of the biggest things that, you know, I look at personally, and obviously, and I think from a community standpoint as well, we've seen the change, or lack thereof, some would say, in the black family. So, you know, with us going into a new year, going into 2025 and where we are right now, the biggest question I have, brother, is, you know, what's next for the black family?
That's a large, in-depth question.
Absolutely.
What's next, right? And definitely, I believe the answer just lies into perspective and where a person is, because we have different levels of black family.
Absolutely.
That's where what I would first say is that when we talk about the black family, we're not a monolith. We have, within the structure of America, there are different family structures that lie in different wealth stations and class. So first of all, I'll say that. Then what's next? What I see next is we need more black families.
Absolutely.
We need an increase of marriage. We need an increase of unity. You know, when you talk to different black people, of course, I'm in a barbershop, you know what I'm saying, do wealth advisement. Oftentimes what I encounter is people being disgruntled with us not being able to proverbial stick together, right? I hear that often. And even in ministry, it's like, well, the first thing we got to do is we got to come together. Well, and I do agree, we have to come together. But the basis of coming together first is in the family structure.
Absolutely.
It's between a husband and a wife. That's the first connection that needs to be made, is because that's where it's through a man and a woman where you end up getting children.
Absolutely.
That's what creates family. That's what creates a community, right? A community doesn't start by just one person. A community starts with a group of people. And so that's where I think we need to focus on now, is getting the man and the woman to get on one accord with one another. And then when the man and woman are able to get on one accord with one another, then they're able to procreate and have children. And once they are on one accord with one another, then they have children, then their children are going to have a greater impact on society. Right? And so that's where we have to start, I believe, for the black family, is getting men and women on one accord with one another. Now, when I say one accord, that does not mean that we are going to agree 100%,
of course,
on all things. What that means is that what God has invested in me to bring to the table, that he also has a woman for me to connect with. Now, my connection and what I bring is going to be different than what she brings.
Absolutely.
But when we bring it together, what we realize is What she has is what I needed, and what I have is what she needs.
Complementary parts.
Complementary parts. But oftentimes, those parts kind of clash because they're different, right? But what we have to realize is you can't connect two puzzle pieces that are shaped the same way. Oftentimes, puzzle pieces that connect to one another, one has a gap in one place and the other one has that tab that fits into that gap. And that's what we have to realize with husbands and wives, men and women, is we are closing the gap in our personal lives.
Yeah.
Right. I'm filling the gap for you and you're filling the gap for me. And I think that's the number one thing we have to start with. And to get an understanding of that, family starts with God. Family starts with God. You go to Adam and Eve in the Bible, right? That's first example that we have a family where God created the man, Adam, and then he realized that Adam needed a helpmate, and that the animals and the plants and all the other things that were created were not enough to satisfy what he needed to be complementary to him. So he created Eve, and then God blessed them to be what? Fruitful and multiply.
Yeah. You know what's crazy? You know, when you're saying it, my started to kind of have to wondering and just thinking about some different things. And one thing I do feel like has changed is that the appreciation for what the other person brings when it's not the same thing that you bring. So one thing I'm blessed at is that, you know, God did bring me a wife, and I believe that he who finds a wife finds a good thing, gains favor in God's eyes. So I'm definitely blessed and highly favored for that aspect. But, you know, one thing I can say is that, you know, me and my wife we're opposites, but we're not. You know, she brings something to my life, and, you know, I'm hoping that I bring something, you know, it's an early life. But I think what, you know, previous generations understood and appreciated that's different from our generation today is because we live in such a materialistic society now, whereas in times past, you know, granddaddy went out and worked, you know, my mama, my grandmother, my mother's grandparents from the country, and, you know, granddaddy worked in the field, and he went and he tended to the hoes and took care of the horses, and, you know, had the watermelon, he had the corn, had the, you know, all the different fruits and vegetables that they, you know, planted on their fields. And, you know, grandma was at home picking them peas, you know, shelling that corn, you know, washing them strawberries. She was at home preparing the meal.
Yes.
You know, and tending to the kids, and, you know, they had different roles and responsibilities, but they were still appreciated just the same. I feel like there's a lack of appreciation now for what other people bring to a relationship because there's such a premium value on monetary gifts. So whereas now, if a man is not providing, or if a woman is not providing, and depending on how much you're providing, that dictates how much love and appreciation we're not giving people.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, in my individual situation, I didn't need for my wife to necessarily bring me financial support.
Right.
But she brought me peace.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she may not have needed, you know, financial stability. She needed emotional support, you know, because we need different things in order to become whole. And I think, you know, unfortunately, in this generation, today's day and time, there's such a premium based on monetary value, and everyone's success in today's world is a lot of times is defined by how much money we think a person has or what kind of car they drive, that it puts us in a situation where I feel like we're missing or overlooking a lot of the real value that people can bring into your life. Because we're looking at, okay, well, you're not giving me what I'm giving you. Well, you're not supposed to give me what I give you. I don't need the same thing.
Correct.
If I'm out working and taking care of this, I need you to bring something that's complimentary, not to make me whole.
That's right.
And I think that's one of the things we're missing just from a relationship standpoint, because our society has changed, because relationships have, you know, evolved or devolved, you know, depending on how you want to look at it, you know.
Right.
But I think that's one thing that we can take from those previous generations and understanding that, you know, we all have a role to play, and it's okay if we're not playing the same role, but appreciating the other person as long as they're giving 100% maximum effort in their area.
Correct.
You know, and I think that's, you know, some kind of way we've gotten kind of lost. And I think obviously society has played a part in that. Obviously the financial struggles that we've had in our community has played a big part in that. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into, you know, the struggle that obviously we've had as African Americans, here in the United States of America. And, it always gets me to thinking, and we look back and how the Black family used to be portrayed, and just coming up, you look at TV. You remember when we were growing up, when I was growing up, it was the Cosby Show, where we had, Family Matters, and we had all these shows that had positive Black. We had a different world where it made you want to go to college. It made you want to seek education. There was a premium on education. And all of a sudden, if we look at our TV now, I don't want to let my kids watch TV because the images and what they're seeing is not as positive. Now, those positive shows still exist,
Correct.
but it's just not the same. It's not promoted. It's not pushed to the forefront. Cosby Show was prime time television. We used to wait all week long to see that new episode of A Different World and Cosby Show and things of the nature. So, that feeling of family that, that we had has
dissipated, as you said.
Right. It's definitely dissipated to a certain extent. And, me wondering how to get that back. Well, I think it's reflected in area of your life.
Uh-huh.
I think obviously, you can speak to how, you see that, in the church. And, what are some things that you feel like maybe we can do in the home, in the church, in the community? Because, you said a few episodes back, and if you haven't tuned into those episodes, I definitely encourage you to go back and check our YouTube page and catch up with some of those episodes that my brother Richardson provided some great insight, is that, things are not always what they seem.
Mm-hmm.
Just because a picture is painted don't mean it's a truthful picture or an accurate picture. And, you spoke about how, the world paints us as if we're not together, but then when you drive past a football field, you see us out supporting our kids. You see youth coaches getting little league football teams together. You see people donating to make sure the kids have the cleats and the gloves and the spat on the shoes and all the things that it takes to be and look good on the football field. And we got, 30 kids out there on each team, playing football. So we have to be coming together somewhere. So, just where are we dropping the ball, and where do you feel like we could pick it up?
I think one place where we're dropping the ball is we're seeking too much superficial satisfaction. And that's because we are allowing a lot of mainstream media and social media to feed us too much propaganda.
Absolutely.
That we're not taking a full assessment of what is really around us. We don't see the value in what we're actually doing. And a lot of times, especially, let's talk about men for a moment. Just like what you just said, and we talked about in previous episodes about how you see these fathers, while they may have multiple kids with multiple women, and we're not promoting that at all, but we do appreciate the fact that you are willing to go and pick that child up and take that child to football practice and go to their games, right? And there's always improvement that can be done. But we do appreciate the fact that fathers do take that amount of time. We do appreciate the fact that fathers will take their kids to a jump park or do things like that, right? And so I think that's number one, is we have to value what we're actually doing and not evaluate ourselves on what we're not doing. It's very easy to point out where something is lacking, but it's hard to appreciate what you have.
Yeah, it
is. And that's even in my personal life. I have to guard myself on that. It's like, okay, you wake up and you're going about, and it's like, okay, man, I could use more of this. But how much appreciation am I showing God for what I do have?
Yeah.
When I look in the mirror and say, okay, what are the talents that I have, and how can I utilize them? And a lot of times we're not using everything that we already have. And so I think that's where we're losing out, is take the time and value what we have. From ministry side and barbershop, that's part of the biggest issues. One of the biggest issues that I hear is I see successful Black men who are married and have wives that are working and striving. All right, they haven't reached the pinnacle of where they can be, but they're working toward it. And then these same men, they come in and they complain about what's not. And I have to slow them down and say, okay, well, what is?
Yeah.
What do you have at your disposal? What are you doing now? You know what I'm saying? And okay, hey, let's take that. And while you may not have gotten to your full potential, let's build on where you are.
Yeah.
Let's build on that. Let's work to add some more layers to that, right? Because we have a good foundation. We have a good foundation of who we are. Because the foundation that I'm saying we have is a desire to be one. That's one thing that I do hear, that in the complaint, what I hear is a desire to work with one another.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, I see the problems in my society and I believe that we need to do a better job. And I say, hey, that's good. Because you see an issue and you want to be the solution to that issue.
You know what? And in saying that, I think that desire is there and it's just as high as it ever was, if not even greater. I think what's not there is the communication and the togetherness. Whereas I may be in the barbershop and I'm a quiet person by nature, which is ironic that we have a podcast and a radio show. And I'm a financial advisor that speaks to people for a living, but I'm somewhat reserved by nature. So if I'm in the barbershop and I don't necessarily know you well, I'm not the person that's going to walk up to somebody, introduce myself, and just, strike up a conversation. I'm going to sit there and I was raised to be seen and not heard. That's the way me when I was growing up, this is the way we were. Like, look, your dad said, you sit out and shut up and you watch. You always pay attention. You keep your head on the swivel. Just things you learn growing up, learn how to be a man, so to speak. And, I think if we were a little bit more open, and I'm speaking to myself as well in this situation, and communicated more with those brothers, I think we would find out that there was probably more common ground than we realized. But because we're not having that communication and understanding that he wants to accomplish and do some of the same things in the community that I do, there's not the unification that can lead to the execution. Whereas I'm thinking about it, you're thinking about it, they're thinking about it, but none of us are communicating to get on that same accord. And, I struggled with, that, because I'm a person that's never satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that individual personal relationship with Christ comes into play. And you have to have that. And obviously, I believe the man is leader of the household. I was taught you're supposed to be pastor, provider, prophet, and priest. And if you're not doing those things as a man, you're falling short. Then, it's hard for me to say that, you're a man. Now, that don't mean you can't bear children, you can't support your family. But these are things that I think that if you want to call yourself a man, these are areas that I want to strive to be the best I can be. And I'm still working to be better at. But, in that, I think if we start to look at things that way, and I have to guard myself, and when my personal relationship with Christ come in, where I had to grow is because I'm such an ambitious person and I'm never satisfied, learning to be content, but not being covetous of someone else's success. I think that's where we have certain issues where we see in our community, because I feel like opportunities and resources have been so limited. It's almost like somebody else's success means that it's taken away from mine. When really it's more than enough for everybody to be successful. We can root on everybody. We can support everybody's business, and nobody's going to take food out of our mouth. Actually, it's going to put more food back in your mouth if we start adopting those habits and principles. But those are things that I had to learn, and I had to, come to grips with it and learning to be more content with where God has me in my life, and making sure that I'm appreciating the journey. I'm learning along the way, not just striving and forgetting what I had to go through. Like, no. If you don't pass this test, God is not going to give you a new test. So I had to get to a point where I learned, don't covet the success of somebody else. That doesn't mean that your success is going to be limited and not going to happen. You just have to wait your turn. And usually what waiting your turn comes in at, it means that God's saying you ain't ready yet because you haven't passed the test that I've given you. See you in a second.
Mm-hmm. Welcome back to Closing the Gap podcast. I'm co-host Eddie Richardson, along with the major host, the man Wilbert Hamilton. And we're just circling back, talking about the Black family and the issues that go on within the Black family and the Black community. And when we're talking about closing the gap, the truth about Black wealth, we realize that the key to Black wealth is having a good family structure, as being one. And we talked about earlier, Wilbert, about how men and women have to stick together and realize that our differences are what makes us become one. And that it's not, oftentimes we try to make our mates who we are, but don't realize that we need to value each other for who they are. And that's what ends up bringing us together. And then also we want to hear with this podcast and this medium that we have with being on V94.9 and YouTube and social media with this podcast, we're striving to help our community. So I would say, number one, that not saying that we need a pat on the back, but I think that you started this podcast and brought me along to really help us, right? Help us personally be able to voice the things that we see going on in the community. So I would say that this medium is definitely part of the solution for the community, is that, hey, we're sitting down, we're talking, and we're sharing what we see, me from church, barbershop, and hearing men talk on a daily basis. You from seeing families come in and what their finances look like or lack thereof, but yet their desire to build financial stability for their families.
Absolutely.
And I think going forward now, after we've had the election, we had some people were upset, some people were glad, but nonetheless, we have Donald Trump is our president. He's already started assigning different people to his cabinet and what he's going to do. And now we have to find our way forward as a people of where we're going to go. And so I believe that I want to talk about for a moment, where can we find unity? And I think during the time of civil rights and other times when things were tough on us, it was the social organizations that gave us that place of unity, right? You stated earlier about how you're a more reserved person just by nature, where you're not going to just automatically go out and talk to somebody, but yet and still you end up finding out that you want to unify the community and work just like somebody else does, but you hadn't had the opportunity to sit down with that person and speak
Correct.
In that way. And so I think within our social organizations, we need to do that more. I've seen on social media, and you've seen it too, where there's an attack on some of those from a spiritual side, and people that have been denouncing fraternities and sororities. And I understand that and respect what they're doing. But you being in Kappa Alpha Psi, me being in Omega Psi Phi, what we've seen through our experiences there and some of the people that come through there have been great men.
Absolutely.
That have made social change, not only for their organization, but for the good of the community.
Correct.
In working to build Black families and fighting for justice. And so I believe that that's a place that we need to revisit, in my opinion, that we need to revisit, and instead of using these things as a time to just party, a time to get away from your husband or your wife, that is really a place where we need to sit down and strategize with men
Yes.
that have like ideals to try to move the community forward. So what's your view?
No, I definitely believe that. I mean, for me, and being I would say a legacy member, father obviously plays Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, incorporated, uncles, and a number of people in my family. When I joined, it was about family. It was bigger than a party on Saturday night. It wasn't about the social interactions that I could create. It was a legacy thing, and how I saw men carry themselves, men represent themselves in the family. I mean, in the community, them taking care of their families and just being men of God and men of the people, so that's what, I feel like obviously we need to get back to doing. And there's some brothers that are still doing a great job with it. And there's some brothers here I know in Birmingham that, brothers of mine that, doing great things, still working with the kids, working in the community, doing great things with capital E's and things of that nature. So it's still happening. It's just, unfortunately, I feel like we're not promoting it as much as we should. I'm gonna throw myself in that. I could be a little bit antisocial because I'm so focused and locked in on my own personal dreams and ambition. And I think that may be some of the issue that we have. We've all become a little bit more selfish in today's world. I've always been a person that, is very selfless. I'm a big giver. I believe in, giving away more than you receive. But one thing I've also learned, in order to be great in life, in order to accomplish something great, you got to be a little bit selfish too, as far as the road you travel, because it's, a lot of people are not going to understand, when you're on that path, when the dream is big, some of the things that you have to sacrifice, things you have to do. But that's why, like we said earlier, you got to find that right helpmate that compliments you. And I'm blessed to have a wife that compliments me and understands my big dream and vision of things I want to accomplish. She lets me go after it. So, all those things actually work together, from that standpoint. And, but definitely, having some round tables. It's something I think that doesn't happen enough, is a round table where probably between fraternities. I would like to see that, because there's always, of course, stigmas on, how Kappas operate, how Qs operate, how Alphas operate. We all remember the stigmas back in the day. And when you looked at a brother, you could almost point him out and say what fraternity he was probably in based on the perception of that fraternity. It's almost like, hey, the brother clean, they got a bow tie, he called himself a pretty boy. It's almost like, okay, he a Kappa. Oh, then he can walk around, you see some gold boots, you see a big chain around there, well, he a dog. If you see, that brother, he got that backpack on, and he's headed to class, and he gonna get there 15 minutes early, he probably an Alpha. That's just the way it was. It's just the way things have always kind of been. So those stigmas have always been there. But I think that as we, grow up, we all gravitate to like-minded people, and we gravitated to organizations and that where we felt like a representation of us, when in all likelihood, we probably needed to do that. But the next step needs to be, we have to have, some kind of come to Jesus meeting, because we all are actually in it for the same cause.
True.
We all have the same goal and objective, which is to be service, to community and beyond, which, each one teach one, helping people, giving back. And that's one thing I think that when I go back to those past generations, they did a little bit better than we did as far as with that community, because I think they were so much more involved because they had to be. The struggles that they were going through were real struggles. So they had to lean on each other a whole lot more than I feel like we probably had to do some of the blessings that we've been given based on what we received from the hard work that they put in. So I think we've lost a little bit of that. So maybe having some kind of, town hall meeting between brothers, because I always envy how, certain brothers get together and how they, stick together and how they, do things and it goes past just, a college party, those lifelong brotherhoods and, friendships and relationships, and how, people are giving back and helping out. I'm thankful for them because I've benefited from them in business.
Yes.
I've been places and, I bumped into a guy, and next thing you know, your bro, hey man, say less, man, hey, business is done. We got nothing to talk about. I know you're a good brother. We know some of the same people. So, there are definitely benefits and value, in having those relationships. But I think we need to cross-promote some of those relationships. At the end of the day, 99% is black too.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, we're ain't no law saying that, my son can't marry a cute daughter. So at some point in time, those lines are going to get crossed. And we need to have, I think, start having a little bit more communication. And I think that comes down to and comes back to circling around and having more trust, because I think the distrust that permeates our community, a lot of times comes from a lack of communication.
True.
And I always tell people when we have these conversations, we, of course, when we do the foundation of closing the gap, and people are always asking, well, how do we close that wealth gap? And I always tell them it comes back to trust. And they look at me like, well, you don't have some kind of mathematical formula or some kind of investment. It ain't crypto, it ain't stocks, it ain't real estate. No, it comes back to trust. But you can't have trust without communication. And that's something that I'm kind of hitting me, right now today. that we need to have, and I need to have more communication in order to rebuild and build trust with more individuals so we can be of service, so we can help. So I think that's, one of the things that, and which is amazing, about this podcast, and what I think makes us different is that, we're both comfortable enough, I think, just as men and in our own personal walks, to be transparent. And I think that's something that is lacking. I'm not perfect, never have been, never claim to be, but, I'm going to always put my best foot forward and make the best decision I can in any given moment. And yeah, you're going to have some missteps along the way, and you're going to make some mistakes along the way, but it's how you respond to the mistakes and the adversity. For me, it's always the greatest sign of a man is, how do you treat people when you at your worst? If you can still bless somebody and be there for someone when things are not going right for you, and you have enough perspective and understanding that whatever God got me going through in this moment, that's for me to grow from. Because if he brought me to it, that means he's going to bring me through it. So if I can have that kind of perspective and still see an opportunity to help somebody along the way, I think that's where we start to have some of that growth, but having to be selfless enough to do that. And I think those are some of the things that we, all probably need to do a little bit of self-reflection on, because we've all gotten a little bit self-absorbed to a certain extent, with our own lives. And society's kind of, unfortunately, kind of wired us this way too.
Yeah.
And everything is, people taking selfies. Everything is, is everything is for the likes, as opposed to it being about, real substance. And unfortunately, like I said, the lie spreads a whole lot faster than the truth ever will. And I think, our society's ran for that. And unfortunately, I think a lot of ways we fell into that. And I fall into that from time to time, because sometimes social media will put you in a position where you make an assumption on something without knowing all the facts. And that's why I say I've grown a lot from a standpoint of, I don't judge anything. I take everything with a grain of salt. People always say, when you see people that in high ranking positions, like, why would they do this? Why would they do that? Well, I'd have did this, I'd have did that. I'm like, well, it's easy to say that when you're not in a position making that decision.
Yeah, but
And so
you in that.
and you understand that there's a lot of things come with this, and you're not making decisions just for you.
Right.
There's things that I can look at, and we had, President Obama in office, and there were some things that I would have liked for him to do maybe a little bit differently.
Correct.
But having to take a step back and say, well, you know what? He didn't grow up the way I grew up. He didn't grow up going to Magic City Classic and going to Tuskegee, Bama State, Turkey Day Classics. He didn't grow up going to Bayou Classics. He didn't have maybe the same affinity for our culture because he didn't have the same experience. So me expecting him to make the same decision, operate the way I would, it's foolish on my part. And him being biracial, having a white mother, having a African father, those are dynamics that I don't understand.
Right.
So his decision making, where he was looking at things, where he was doing things for all people, I'm like, well, he kind of is all people.
Yeah.
And that's the role and responsibility. Now, we would have liked him to be a little bit more selfish the way we see a Donald Trump being. We see him operating in a very selfish manner, doing strictly what he feel like is in the best interest of him. And sometimes we have to realize, and we're not educated enough to understand that, President Obama didn't have the House and the Senate the way Trump had it his first go around, or even the way he's going to have it right now. So he couldn't put in place a lot of things that maybe he would have wanted. So where I would have been, as a younger me, would have been quicker to criticize him because of what I'm saying he's not doing, versus taking a step back and understanding, well, maybe he wanted to, he just couldn't get it done. And maybe he couldn't get it done because I myself wasn't a big enough communicator and doing enough to help people understand the position he's in and how maybe we can support. So I think that's where, we can definitely, take a step in doing our own individual assessment and evaluation of what can we do better. I'm a big person on, don't call out somebody else for what they not doing if you ain't doing nothing yourself. Like, handle your business first,
That's it. Yeah. And once you start handling your own business, that's what allows you to start trusting somebody else more.
Yep.
And I think that basis of trust, or the lack thereof of trust, is because I believe, we don't trust God enough.
Yep.
Right. When you begin to trust God, the one that you don't see, then you are able to actually trust the person that you see. Because I believe it works in that opposite dynamic to where scripture says, how can you love the God that you don't see, but you don't love the man that you see? Right. And so once you start trusting God, that's what allows you to love the ones that you see, because you're trusting in somebody that you don't see, but you do believe that they exist. And that basis of trust in the church is where you find it, right? And I'm not saying that you need church to build that trust, but it is there that you come and you have the experience with God and you learn more about God. And that's what ends up building your trust and building your hope on the eternal things that now, with everything that's happening in the world, it doesn't have the adverse effects on you, because you know where your help comes from, because you have put your faith foundationally in God, and you know that he has the guidance over your life and is going to keep you protected and is going to supply you with all your needs, because it is through him that all things come.
Absolutely.
And so when we get back there, so as we talked about the social organizations, and we know that everybody in our listening community is not a part of a fraternity or a sorority or a social organization, but one that you can join is join a church.
Mm-hmm.
You join a church and get with some like-minded people, and that is the think tank place.
Yeah.
When you think about some episodes before, you talked about Martin Luther King, and we talked about his dream, and then we talked about his aim of trying to build financial freedom within the community. If you go back and look at videos of those speeches, the majority of them were done in a church.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just because he was a preacher,
Mm-hmm.
but it was because the church was the safe place.
The meeting ground.
Yeah, the safe place, the meeting ground where all of us were. We don't have the luxury of the financial luxury to have country clubs and social clubs and supper clubs where we can just, come and pay and show up and have waiters serve us,
Mm-hmm.
right? But where do we do that? We do that in the church. Is where we used to do it.
Yes.
Right. That's the place that we would come and we would gather, and then we would go into that fellowship hall. Right. Because most of the time, a lot of the older churches, the fellowship hall was bigger than the sanctuary.
Yeah.
Right. Because the fellowship hall was where we knew where you sat down and you ate together. When you sit down and you break bread together, then you're able to have that communication and find common bonds between other people that you might not necessarily know in the beginning. But when you sit down, and it's something about food that just
takes a little joke.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And it makes everybody relax, and you put your guard down and you're able to open up and have some communication, right? And so that's why that fellowship hall, it was built, called a fellowship hall, because it was built for fellowship. Because let's sit here, let's eat, let's talk, and let's find some common ground to build ourselves. And that's where we build our community. That's where we repair the broken places that we have, right? Everything is not broken, but we do have some things that we need to work on.
Absolutely.
All right. And so we get back there. That's what I believe will move us forward. So we want all of our subscribers to our podcast. We want all of those that listen to the show throughout the week. On Saturdays and in the week on the radio show, to take the time, pray for your community, pray for one another, and seek those places of unity that you can get into. I challenge us all to find a church where we can unite with one another. And if you are in your social organization, get back active there, right? And I guarantee you that you will find like-minded people that will help move our community forward, especially while we're in this new election cycle and as we get ready to go into 2025.
And that's how you close the gap on V90.9 WATV.